Hey, I'm Max and welcome to my Unity Basics video. Today we'll take a look at the particle system. Let's get right into it. So to create a particle system, you just have to right click, go into Effects and then Particle System. So let's drag it up a little bit and see what it looks like. By default, it's just a bunch of white sphere going up. So first here you have the duration. The duration is useful if you're using burst. So here in the emission I can add a burst. And as you can see, if my duration is 5 seconds, it's going to loop every 5 seconds, so it's going to do that burst every 5 seconds. Also, if you don't have looping, then the duration will show how long it's going to emit for. Now let's check back looping and let's remove that burst so we can talk about it later. So here we have the start lifetime. So this is how long the particles stay before disappearing. So as you can see, they disappear after 5 seconds. If I set it to 1, then it's after 1 second. With most parameters in the particle system, you can click the little arrow next to it and select a curve or random between two constants or two curves. I like to do random between two constants and do something like 0.3 to 0.6 or something like that. This way you have some particles that last longer than others, or something like 1 to 3. So you can see some of them disappear very early and some of them last very long. Same thing for the speed here. You can do random between two constants and do something like from 4 to 8. So you can see some of them are going faster than others. Size, well, that's pretty self-explanatory. It's the size of each particle, and once again you can do random. Rotation, same thing, rotation of the particles, and you can do random as well. The color is going to be the same as the color on the sprite renderer, so it's going to apply a color to each pixel. You can also add a gravity to your particles. The simulation space defines if the particles are going to follow the particle system or not. So let's say they're local. If I move my particle system, you can see the other particles follow. But if I set it to world, then if I move my particle system, it changes where they emit, but the old ones stay where they were. Here in the emissions, you can set the rate over time of particles. So let's say I set 50, then it spawns 50 particles per second. And you can also add burst, so let's do 2 and add a burst at time 0 of 30. And as you can see, since the duration is 5 seconds, every 5 seconds it resets the time to 0 and creates a burst of 30. So if you want to, let's say, create an explosion, you want to set the emission over time to 0, and then you disable looping and you create a burst. And when you create the particle system, it's going to create a burst and then delete itself. Actually, the particle system doesn't delete itself when it stops, but you can put a script on it so that when it stops, it deletes. Over here we have the shape, so you can control the shape of the emission. So if we set it to something like a sphere, then it goes all around. If you set it to, let's say, an hemisphere, then it's 180. And you have parameters for each of them. So let's say cone, you can set the angle, and you can set the radius, and you can also set the rotation, so you can rotate where it emits the particles on the X and the Y and the Z. You can change the colors of the particles over the lifetime. So let's say you click the left side and you set it to red, and then the left side you set it to the right side, you set it to green. It's going to go from red to green. You can set the size over lifetime, which is something that I really like. So let's say I put it as a down shape, a down curve. So if you set it as a down curve, the particles are going to start big and get smaller before disappearing. You can also give it a rotation over lifetime, so it spins around. You can also add collisions to the particles, so they can collide with box colliders and other type of colliders. If you choose to have collisions on your particles, most likely you'll want to select world and then 2D, so it can collide with 2D colliders. If you want to set a texture sheet animation, you can click here to enable it and then click sprites. And then you can put any sprite into it, and you can even put an animation. So as you can see now, my particles are little faces. You can also give them trails, but if you do activate trails, you have to go into the renderer and set a trail material. So let's say something like default lit. Let's say sprite default, and now as you can see, they just create a sprite of their color. And here in the renderer, you can change the material. You can change the trail material if it's on. You can enable a few settings like the shadows, and also an important one is the ordering layer, because as you can see here, if I drag my particle system down here, you don't see them anymore. Well, you kind of see them because of the edit, but you don't really see the faces. That's because the ordering layer is 0. So if I set it to 2, then you can see them over the background. So that's pretty much all the basics you need to know for the editor of particle system. When it comes down to making a script, you can create a particle system variable. And then using the variable, you can change most settings, like you can change the emission enabled or the emission burst count and all that stuff. Also, some important functions might be to stop it and to check if it's stopped, if it's paused, to pause it, to play it. Another thing that might be useful for scripts with particle system is that if you pause it and then you make it play again, if you have, let's say, a burst at the time 0 because you're starting your car or whatever and it does a puff of smoke, if you pause it and then you play it again, it's not going to do the burst at time 0 again. If you want to reset the time, you can do your particle system.time equals 0 and it's going to trigger the burst at 0 again. Some functions also that might be useful: if you have collision in your particles, you can use the unparticle collisions, so you can know when your particles collide with something. So for example, if you make coin particles and you want to know when the particles collide with the player, you can check in here. Hopefully that clears up particle systems for you, and now you can create the particle systems that you want. And you can create some cool effects like this one for when something explodes. And if you have a particle system that you like and that you want to use in your script, let's say an explosion particles that you want to create when something explodes, you can drag it as a prefab and then use it in your script with a public game object system prefab, or whatever you want to call it, and then you just instantiate the prefab. So instantiate the prefab at whatever position and rotation. You can check my game object video if you want to know how to do that. Make sure to go check out my other Unity tips and tutorials if you want to get better at making games, and subscribe if you want.